Tessa led Naira through the brightly lit hallways of the human embassy aboard the station, the hum of the engines blending with the soft murmur of conversations around them. Humans and aliens, including a handful of curious Urians, milled about, exchanging knowledge and experiences. It had been weeks since the Gyrane delegation arrived, and Tessa had quickly grown accustomed to their intense fascination with Earth's many oddities. "Here we are," Tessa said, pushing open a door that led to a large conference room filled with holographic screens. She gestured to the panels, which displayed various biological processes on Earth, including photosynthesis, human digestion, and reproductive cycles. Naira, walking beside her, gave a quick glance at the screen. "You say this is one of your most important functions?" Naira asked, her tone sharp and slightly skeptical. She wasn't overtly dismissive, but there was no hiding the sense of superiority that came with being a species that had mastered technology and biology far beyond human understanding. Tessa hesitated. "Well, yes, reproduction is essential for our species' survival," she said carefully, trying to sound as neutral as possible. "But it's not just biological. It's deeply tied to emotions, relationships, and our sense of connection with others." The alien's dark, shimmering eyes flickered with confusion, and her tendrils, part of her species' intricate sensory system, tensed. "Emotions." Naira repeated the word slowly, as if testing it for meaning. "You feel when you reproduce." Her voice had a slight edge, a mix of disbelief and a hint of curiosity. Tessa chuckled, unable to fully suppress the awkwardness. "Yes, we do. In fact, it's one of the most emotionally significant experiences for humans. But I know it's different from your way of doing things." Naira's expression remained unchanged, but her silence spoke volumes. Tessa felt the need to clarify further, feeling the weight of the alien's piercing gaze. "Humans, we form bonds, emotional bonds, through physical intimacy. It's not just about the act of reproduction. It's about connection, trust, and often love." "Love." Naira's voice was flat, almost as if the concept itself was something foreign, incomprehensible. Tessa shrugged, trying to make the concept simple. "Yes, love. It's the deep affection we have for another person. And that can drive us to want to reproduce, not just for survival, but because we want to create something. Someone. Together." Naira's tendrils twitched again, this time in something resembling a shiver. "I see. And you do this regularly?" Tessa blinked, a mix of surprise and amusement flashing across her face. "Well, it's a bit more complicated than just being regular," she began. "Humans don't reproduce constantly, but when it happens, it's usually with someone we've chosen to bond with." Naira tilted her head, clearly trying to process the information. Her people's reproductive process didn't involve anything like the emotional connection humans had. Gyrians had no need for affection to reproduce. Life was created through a precise mental connection, sterile, calculated, and devoid of emotion. "And this bond?" Naira asked, her voice trailing off as she seemed to examine the very idea. "It's what makes humans want to reproduce." "Exactly," Tessa said, smiling a little at Naira's bewilderment. "It's not just about survival. It's about creating life together, sharing that experience with someone you care about." There was a long pause as Naira stared at Tessa. Finally, she spoke again, her voice filled with disbelief. I don't understand. Why would anyone choose to do something so chaotic?" Tessa laughed softly, shrugging. "Maybe that's exactly why we do it. We're messy, we're emotional, and we love deeply. But in the end, it's all part of being human." Naira said nothing for a moment. She looked at the screen displaying the human family celebrating a birth, the joy and exhaustion clear on their faces. For the first time, Naira seemed unsure of her next question. Tessa could sense that the conversation was far from over, and whatever Naira was about to ask next would lead them even deeper into the heart of human life. The silence between them was thick as Naira processed Tessa's words. She stood still, staring at the hologram of a couple sharing a tender moment. In Jarain culture, relationships were formed for purely functional reasons. Expanding the species was a responsibility, not a choice. There were no emotional ties to the act of reproduction. It was efficient, devoid of personal attachments. The thought of humans adding emotions to something as essential as reproduction was utterly baffling to Naira. "So, you humans," Naira started cautiously, her voice as measured as ever, "you choose to experience this connection, despite the risks, the physical toll." Tessa couldn't help but smile at the alien's tone. Naira's curiosity was both intense and unsettling, like an investigator trying to find the flaw in a well-constructed experiment. But Tessa understood. This was new territory for her, and as much as Naira was trying to process it, there was no way she could grasp the full complexity of human emotions with just a few explanations. "Well, yes, it's not just about procreation," Tessa said, looking at her carefully. "Humans, we build relationships, form connections. Sometimes we choose to be intimate because we want to share our lives with someone. It's not always about having children. Sometimes it's about companionship or even just pleasure." The word pleasure seemed to catch Naira off guard. She blinked, clearly struggling to make sense of the concept. You choose to feel pleasure she asked, as though testing the word, like it didn't quite fit within her understanding of biological processes. "Yes," Tessa said with a soft chuckle. "We do. Humans experience pleasure as part of our emotional connection. It's not something that's simply about reproduction. It's part of how we bond with each other." Naira stared at her, her expression unreadable. "But why?" she asked, her voice flat. "Why would you want to feel such unpredictability? Why not just focus on the task of reproduction itself?" Tessa shook her head, trying to contain her amusement. Naira was trying so hard to fit human behavior into her own logical framework, but it wasn't working. I don't think there's a simple answer to that. For humans, the emotional experience makes reproduction meaningful. It's about connection, about feeling something deeper than just creating life. It's about who you share it with." "Connection," Naira repeated the word slowly, as though trying to make it fit into her alien mind. "So you would choose to feel these things, even if they bring pain or frustration." Tessa's eyes softened as she realized that Naira was asking about more than just the act itself. She was asking about the whole human experience. "Yes," Tessa said quietly. "We choose to feel because those feelings, love, desire, even pain, are part of what makes us human. They shape our lives, our relationships, and how we see the world. Without them, we wouldn't be who we are." There was a long pause before Naira spoke again. "And what happens when this connection fades? When the bond breaks?" Tessa felt a flicker of discomfort. She anticipated this question, but it still didn't make it easier to answer. "Well, it's not always easy. Sometimes relationships end, and that can be painful. It's like when a plant grows. It needs both sun and rain. But not all rain is pleasant. Sometimes it hurts. But without it, the plant wouldn't thrive. Humans don't always thrive in pain, but we learn from it. It's part of how we grow." Naira was silent for a long time, her gaze fixed on the display in front of them, where images of human couples, families, and children flashed by. She watched with fascination, unable to fully understand, but clearly moved by what she saw. "I cannot imagine it," Naira admitted finally, her voice almost wistful. "This mess, this chaotic, unpredictable life you describe." Tessa smiled gently. "It's not easy, but it's worth it. And in the end, we learn to appreciate the moments of joy all the more because we've known the pain." Naira turned toward Tessa, her expression thoughtful. I think I understand. But I don't know if I could ever live like that." Tessa paused. "Maybe that's the point. We don't have to be like you, but you don't have to be like us either. It's what makes each species unique. And maybe it's why we're both here, to learn from each other, even if we don't fully understand. For a moment, Naira said nothing. Then, with a soft sigh, she looked back at the images of human families on the holograms. Perhaps I have more to learn about you humans than I thought. Tessa nodded, her heart warmed by Naira's tentative acceptance. We all do, she said, smiling. We all do. Tessa had hoped the conversation might shift toward a lighter topic, but Naira's curiosity was insatiable, and the questions only grew more intense. With an awkward pause, Tessa decided it might be best to show Naira something she could physically experience, something that might bring her closer to understanding human reproduction. I think you might find this informative, Tessa said, pulling up a video on one of the nearby holographic screens. She hesitated for just a moment before pressing a button, and the screen came to life with a soft glow. The video began with the image of a couple in a hospital room. The woman lay on a bed, her face a mixture of exhaustion and anticipation. Her partner, holding her hand, seemed equally nervous yet completely supportive. As the camera zoomed in, the woman began to breathe heavily, clearly in the final stages of labor. Naira's tendrils twitched, her dark eyes widening with what could only be described as shock. She watched intently, her body still as stone, but there was a visible tension in the way she stood. The sounds of the woman's strained breaths and the occasional muffled voice of the doctor filled the room, and Naira's expression shifted from curiosity to discomfort. She looked away briefly before locking her gaze back on the screen, her discomfort palpable. I can see why this is significant for you, Naira said, her voice strained. But why would you put yourselves through this pain? Tessa watched her carefully, knowing full well how difficult it was to explain this part of human life to someone who had never experienced anything like it. It's part of the process, Naira. The pain, yes, but also the anticipation. The moment of bringing life into the world is indescribable. It's something humans don't take lightly, but it's also beautiful in its own way. Naira didn't answer immediately. She watched the video, the image of the woman pushing through the pain, her husband's hand still holding hers, her face twisted in concentration. The child's cries pierced the air as the birth was completed, and for a brief moment there was nothing but the sound of the newborn's first breath. The doctor cleaned the baby off, and the parents, now overwhelmed with emotion, embraced their newborn child. It was at that moment that Naira's entire body stiffened. Her tendrils flared slightly as she took a step back, her eyes wide in what could only be described as disbelief. This is how you do it?" she asked in a soft, almost horrified voice. Tessa sighed, knowing that this moment would be a turning point in their conversation. This is one way, yes. It's a natural part of human life. A messy, chaotic, but incredibly profound moment. I don't understand," Naira said, her voice low and distant. "Why would anyone choose to experience this agony, to bring a life into the world? It seems so unnecessary." Her words seemed to hang in the air like a weight, as though she could barely process what she had just witnessed. Tessa looked at her, trying to find the words. It's hard to explain. But that moment, when the baby is born, there's a bond, a connection that forms between the parents and the child. The joy that comes with holding your child for the first time. Despite the pain, it's something that changes you. It's something you can't understand until you experience it. Naira shook her head slowly, still struggling to process what she had just watched. On my world, we do not experience pain to create life. We create it efficiently. There is no agony, no emotional upheaval. We simply bring life into existence. Tessa smiled softly, the warmth in her eyes almost sympathetic. I know, your way is very different. But there's something about the messiness of human life that makes it so unique. The pain, the exhaustion, the joy. It's all part of the experience of being human. And to us, it's worth it. For a long moment, Naira said nothing, still staring at the screen as if the birth she had witnessed was somehow imprinted on her mind. Finally, she turned to Tessa, her voice quieter now, almost thoughtful. I cannot fathom the need for such disorder, yet I think I understand. This connection you speak of. It is important to you, isn't it? Tessa nodded, feeling a mixture of pride and sadness for Naira's confusion. Yes, it's everything. Without that connection, we wouldn't be who we are. We wouldn't know what it means to live. Naira was silent for a moment longer, then took a deep breath. It is complicated, but there is a beauty in it, I suppose, even if it is beyond my understanding. Tessa smiled gently. It's okay. Not everyone needs to understand. Sometimes, we just need to experience it for ourselves. With that, the conversation fell into a quieter rhythm, as Naira seemed to reflect on what she had seen. The understanding was slow, but it was beginning to form, and Tessa, though she could see the lingering discomfort in her companion's eyes, felt a small sense of accomplishment. This was a step closer to bridging the gap between their worlds, one question at a time. The room felt heavy with the weight of the conversation as Naira continued to process what she had seen. Tessa had expected her to be disturbed, but the depth of Naira's disbelief was startling. Naira's tendrils twitched slightly, betraying her discomfort, though she remained silent for a long time, her gaze fixed on the floor. Humans are. Naira began cautiously, her voice softer now, as if choosing her words carefully. You are chaotic. She looked up at Tessa, her dark eyes reflecting the confusion swirling in her mind. The bond you speak of, the pain, the love, it's all so tangled. How do you manage it? Why do you let such chaos control your lives? Tessa smiled a little, sensing Naira's unease but understanding her need for clarity. It's not always easy, she said. We don't always manage it, but that's part of being human. The emotions, the bonds we form, they don't come with a manual. They're unpredictable, sometimes painful, but they also make life more meaningful. Naira tilted her head, her tendrils curling thoughtfully. But if emotions are so unpredictable and painful, why would you allow them to govern your lives? It seems like it would be a hindrance to your survival. Tessa leaned back slightly, choosing her words with care. It's true. Emotions aren't always logical. They can complicate things, make us do things we might not otherwise do. But they also bring us closer to each other. They help us connect in ways that logic alone can't. We love, we grieve, we argue. We do all these things because they help us grow. Without them, we'd be, well, empty. There was a quiet pause as Naira processed this, her expression still inscrutable. She didn't speak for a moment, but Tessa could tell the wheels were turning in her mind. Finally, Naira spoke again, but this time her voice was softer, almost tentative. But what about the pain? Naira asked. You said that childbirth, that whole experience, it's painful. What about the heartbreak that comes after? I've seen how humans struggle when relationships break, when the connection fades. Why would anyone choose to go through that? Tessa's heart twinged. The question hit close to home, a reminder of the difficulty of relationships, the tears shed over lost love, and the often overwhelming ache of heartbreak. She sighed quietly, but then met Naira's gaze. It's true, pain is part of the human experience. But heartbreak, though painful, teaches us a lot about ourselves. It helps us understand our needs, our vulnerabilities, and it teaches us resilience. After all, every time we hurt, we also have the chance to heal, to learn, and to love again. Naira absorbed this in silence, her gaze distant as though trying to fathom the meaning of it all. Her people, the Xirians, never felt such deep emotional turmoil. Their reproduction was mechanical, and their lives were marked by cold, rational decisions. To Naira, human emotional chaos seemed like a burden, something that got in the way of efficiency and productivity. But does the joy truly outweigh the pain? Naira asked, her voice almost skeptical. You speak of love, of connections, but when those connections break, when they end, doesn't the pain make everything else seem pointless? Why would anyone choose to feel that way? Tessa thought for a long moment, feeling the weight of the question. She thought of the times in her life when she had loved deeply and lost, of the days spent in sorrow, the quiet ache that lingered long after the initial pain had faded. I won't lie, Tessa said slowly. It's not easy. It's hard. There are days when it feels like the pain is all there is. But the thing is, even in the worst moments, you realize that the connection, the love, was worth it. Because it helped shape you. It helped you grow. Naira's tendrils seemed to relax a bit as she absorbed Tessa's words, though she still looked perplexed. So, you embrace the chaos. You willingly live through it all, knowing how much it will hurt. Tessa smiled, a soft, bittersweet smile. Yes, we embrace it, because we know that the beauty of life, of love, of friendship, of family, isn't just in the good times. It's in everything. It's in the highs and the lows, the tears and the laughter. The messiness is what makes it real. For a long time, Naira remained quiet, as if considering Tessa's words carefully. The silence between them was heavy but not uncomfortable, a rare moment where the gulf between their two worlds felt smaller. Tessa couldn't expect Naira to fully understand. It had taken Tessa years to truly grasp the significance of human emotions herself, to understand why people chose to love, even when it meant risking pain. Finally, Naira broke the silence. I think I see now, she said, though there was still a hint of hesitation in her voice. I don't know if I will ever feel what you do, but I understand why you do it, why humans choose this mess. Tessa smiled warmly, her heart light. That's all I ask. Understanding doesn't have to mean agreement. It just means we're willing to see things from each other's perspective. Naira nodded slowly, her tendrils curling again as she pondered the complexity of human life. Though the alien's understanding was still in its infancy, there was a hint of respect in her expression now, a subtle shift that told Tessa they were making progress. And in that small victory, Tessa realized something else. Perhaps it wasn't just Naira learning about humanity. Maybe Tessa was learning too. The conversation had shifted in a way Tessa hadn't anticipated. While Naira still struggled to understand the emotional complexity of human relationships, there was an openness in her that hadn't been there before. She had listened. She had begun to grasp some of the nuances of what made humans tick, even if the entire picture still felt alien to her. Still, Naira remained silent for a moment, lost in her own thoughts. Tessa, sensing that the next step was hers to take, hesitated before speaking. So, are you ready to see the rest? Tessa asked, her voice light yet hopeful. Naira didn't respond immediately, but instead, her tendrils shifted again, curious but cautious. She looked back at Tessa, as if weighing her words carefully before nodding slowly. Yes, Naira said quietly. I want to understand more. Tessa's heart warmed. All right, let me show you something else. Tessa brought up a different video on the screen, a short documentary that captured the quiet moments of life after childbirth. A mother cradling her newborn, the bonding that occurred over the first days, and the intimate exchanges between the family. This video was less intense than the first, focusing more on the softer, quieter aspects of human reproduction. The love, the care, the fragile beginnings of a new life. As the video played, Naira watched intently, her eyes scanning each moment with the same analytical precision she had shown before. But this time, there was something different in her gaze, something softer, more reflective. There is peace here, Naira commented after a long silence, her voice surprisingly calm. This looks like the beginning of something beautiful. Tessa nodded, feeling a small sense of relief. Yes, it is. It's not just the pain that makes birth significant. It's everything that follows. The moments when a new life is introduced to the world, when a family forms and begins to grow together. I see, Naira said, her voice still thoughtful. It is strange to think of life as a thing that needs emotion to thrive. On my world, the creation of life is more of a technical process, efficient, without the emotional weight. Tessa tilted her head slightly, trying to empathize with Naira's perspective. I imagine that works for your species, and that's okay. But humans are different. We don't just survive, we live. And part of that living comes from embracing our emotions, both the good and the bad. Naira glanced at Tessa, her expression hard to read. But what happens when emotions become a burden? When they cloud judgment or cause harm? Tessa's expression shifted. She'd thought about this herself, especially during her more difficult times in life. She knew how emotions could overwhelm, how love could sometimes hurt more than it healed. But there was an answer she had found over the years, one that had helped her accept the balance of emotions in her life. It's true. Emotions can be a burden. Sometimes they hurt us, even destroy us. But even in those moments we learn. We adapt. We become stronger. The thing about humans is that we can't just exist without our feelings. The pain, the loss. It's all part of the package. We don't shy away from it. We face it, and it teaches us something new. Naira seemed to digest this quietly, watching the mother and child on the screen, the soft glow of the holographic images casting a tender light across her face. So, in the end, it is not just about asterisk surviving asterisk. Naira asked, a hint of realization creeping into her voice. No, Tessa said softly, smiling. It's about living. Living fully with all the complexities that come with it. The joy, the sadness, the love, the loss. They all shape us into who we are. Without them, we would be something less. Something hollow. Naira considered this for a long moment, her eyes narrowing slightly as she processed the words. It was clear she didn't fully agree, but there was a growing understanding in her gaze. The aliens' rigid beliefs about efficiency, about the sterile creation of life, seemed to be slowly softening, if only just a little. You're saying that your species embraces this uncertainty? Naira asked, her voice almost inquisitive, as though the idea was foreign but intriguing. We do, Tessa confirmed. We don't know what tomorrow will bring. We don't know who we'll meet, how we'll feel, or what might happen. But that's part of the beauty of being human. We learn to live with uncertainty. Naira's tendrils twitched again, but this time, it was with something closer to appreciation than confusion. She looked at Tessa, her voice thoughtful, but a little more respectful than before. You make it sound meaningful, Naira said, almost as if it was a new discovery for her, even though it is so chaotic. Tessa smiled warmly, a deep sense of contentment washing over her. Yes, even because it's chaotic. Life, in all its messiness, is what makes it worth living. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Naira simply stood there, her eyes still fixed on the screen, absorbing the complex web of emotions and connections that made humans who they were. And Tessa, for the first time, felt like they had bridged the gap between their two worlds. Not perfectly, but enough for Naira to begin to understand the human experience. The conversation had shifted again, but this time, it felt different. Naira, once so firmly rooted in the practicality of her own world, was slowly coming to terms with the idea that humanity thrived on emotions, chaos, and unpredictability. There was still much she didn't understand, but the walls she had built up around herself were slowly beginning to crack. As the silence between them stretched on, Tessa sensed that Naira's thoughts were deeper than ever. She could see the alien's gaze fixed on the images of human families still playing on the screen, as though she was searching for something more than just an understanding of the act of reproduction. She was looking for something more personal. You know, Tessa began, breaking the silence. It's not all perfect. Human life isn't just about love and connection. we also have a lot of struggles, things that don't always make sense. Naira turned her head slightly, looking at Tessa with renewed interest. What do you mean by struggles? She asked, her voice now more tentative. It was clear that she wanted to understand these complexities, but there was a vulnerability in her question that hadn't been there before. Tessa sighed softly, her gaze drifting to the ground as she thought about how to explain. Life is hard. There are moments when we fail, when we hurt, when we feel like we're not enough, like we'll never be good enough for ourselves or the people around us. Naira's tendrils twitched, and she stepped a little closer, clearly sensing that this part of the conversation was more personal for Tessa. I've seen humans struggle with disappointment, unmet expectations, but what you're describing sounds much more intense, more profound. Tessa nodded, her voice growing quieter. It is. Humans often wrestle with a lot of self-doubt. We question our worth, our purpose. Some even fall into deep despair. Not every relationship lasts. Not every family stays whole. People get hurt, sometimes irreparably. She paused, collecting herself before continuing, and it's not always easy to see a way out. Naira seemed to process this, her expression thoughtful. But despite all this, you keep going. Her voice was incredulous, as if she couldn't fathom how humans could persist in the face of such overwhelming emotional turmoil. We do, Tessa said, her voice filled with quiet resolve. Because even when it feels like the world is falling apart, we find a way to rebuild. We find strength in places we didn't know we had, and in people we didn't realize would be there for us. We can't predict the future. We can't guarantee that everything will turn out okay. But we keep going because there's always a possibility for change, for something better. Naira stood still, her tendrils now fully relaxed. She wasn't just observing now. She was absorbing, taking in the depths of human suffering and resilience. And how do you cope with that pain? She asked, her voice gentle but curious. What do you do when the weight of it all becomes too much? Tessa smiled faintly, the question one she had asked herself many times in the past. We lean on each other. We grieve, we cry, we get angry. And then, when the pain starts to subside, we pick ourselves up again. We allow ourselves to heal, to try again. Some people find solace in family, others in friends, some in work or art or something else. It's not about avoiding the pain. It's about learning to live with it, to move forward despite it. Naira's eyes flickered, as though she was processing the full scope of what Tessa was saying. You do not run from it. Tessa shook her head. No, running from it doesn't help. Facing it, allowing yourself to feel it fully. That's how we grow. It's painful, yes, but it's how we learn what really matters to us. For the first time, Naira's expression softened. I never understood that, she admitted quietly. On my world, we avoid emotional turmoil. We try to make everything as clear-cut as possible, remove the uncertainty. But perhaps, she trailed off, her voice becoming introspective. Perhaps there is a beauty in embracing the chaos after all. Tessa nodded. There is. It's messy, it's unpredictable, but it's also real. The good, the bad, and everything in between. That's what makes life worth living. For a moment, neither of them spoke, allowing the quiet to settle around them. Naira seemed deep in thought, her gaze distant as she considered what Tessa had shared. Tessa herself felt a quiet sense of relief, as though she had been able to share something truly personal with her alien companion, something that transcended cultural boundaries. Finally, Naira turned back toward her, her voice calm but tinged with respect. I think I am beginning to understand. You humans, you are stronger than I thought. Tessa smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. We don't always feel strong, especially when we're in the middle of it all. But we find our way through. That's the thing about humans. We're more resilient than we sometimes give ourselves credit for. Naira gave a small nod, almost imperceptible, but Tessa could see the flicker of recognition in her eyes. I will need to think more on this, Naira said, her tone thoughtful. "But thank you, Tessa. I think I can finally see why your species lives the way you do." Tessa's smile deepened, and she couldn't help but feel a growing sense of camaraderie with Naira. There was still a long way to go, but this conversation felt like a turning point, a moment where their worlds had collided and begun to merge in unexpected, meaningful ways. The room was quiet, save for the soft hum of the holographic screens, still displaying the images of families, their lives unfolding with each frame. Naira stood with her arms crossed, her tendrils still, as though the weight of everything she'd heard had settled heavily within her. Tessa, too, felt the gravity of their conversation pressing down, the bond between them now deeper, though fragile in its own way. Finally, Naira spoke, her voice softer than before. "It is clear now that the way your species experiences life is difficult, more than I imagined. But if emotions are as powerful as you say, what happens when they are *2* powerful? When they overwhelm you, what happens then?" Tessa paused, her eyes lowering as she considered the question. She had seen it before, both in herself and others. The point where emotions, when left unchecked, could break a person, where the pain of loss, betrayal, or failure was too much to bear. She had felt that crushing weight at times, the sharp sting of despair, the paralyzing fear that life had no meaning. "It happens," Tessa said quietly. "Humans can be overwhelmed. Sometimes we can't see a way forward. We falter. And some people don't make it. Some get lost in their pain and never find their way out." Naira's eyes softened, a rare expression of empathy crossing her face. "That is tragic. I can see how it could happen. On my world, we do not let emotions consume us. We are trained to be logical, to detach from feelings when necessary. But you are saying that sometimes, even when you try your best, the weight of it all can be too much." Tessa nodded slowly. "Yes, it's the part of being human that isn't always talked about. We're expected to be strong, to keep going no matter what. But there are moments when the weight of our experiences is just too much to carry alone. That's when people need help, to be reminded that they're not alone, that there's hope, even when it feels impossible." Naira absorbed this, her tendrils shifting, almost uncertain. "And how do you remind them? What can you do when someone is lost in that way?" Tessa sighed, thinking back to the times when she had been the one struggling. Sometimes it's just about being there, just listening. Other times, it's about showing people that they're not alone, that there's more to life than the darkness they're feeling. But not everyone comes back from it. Some people live in that place, and that's the hardest part. Naira's expression darkened slightly, her voice quieter now. "That sounds like a terrible burden. I've seen humans in pain, but I've never fully understood how deep that pain can go. If life is so precious to you, why allow yourselves to experience such suffering?" Tessa thought about this for a long moment, her gaze drifting back to the screen. She had asked herself that same question many times, especially after the darkest periods of her life. Why did humans choose to embrace such a complex, messy existence, knowing the risk of deep emotional turmoil? But in the end, she realized it wasn't just about the good moments. It was the entire journey that gave life meaning, even the struggle. "Because, Naira," Tessa said softly, "the beauty of life is that we experience it in full. The highs and the lows. If we didn't know pain, we wouldn't understand joy. If we didn't lose, we wouldn't know how precious love is. And sometimes, the pain is what leads us to growth, to change." Naira remained silent for a moment, her eyes dark with thought. She had always known life could be efficient and controlled. The Xurians didn't experience the chaotic emotions that humans did. But as she looked at Tessa, she realized that perhaps there was more to the human experience than she had ever considered. There was beauty in the struggle, a meaning to the messiness that couldn't be found in logic alone. "So you do not fear the pain?" Naira asked, her voice quieter, almost uncertain. "You embrace it, knowing that it has a purpose." Tessa smiled faintly, a little sadness in her eyes. Not always. Sometimes. I fear it. But I know it's part of the journey. It's part of being alive. And that's something I wouldn't trade for anything. Naira looked at her, studying her with a newfound respect. I think I am beginning to see why your species lives the way you do. I cannot say I understand it completely, but there is something powerful about it. Tessa's smile widened, the weight of their conversation lifting slightly. It's okay if you don't understand it all. Life isn't always something you can explain. Sometimes, you just have to live it. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Naira seemed lost in thought, her tendrils still as she absorbed everything she had learned. Tessa, too, felt a quiet satisfaction. They had reached a place of understanding, even if it wasn't complete. There would always be more to learn, more to discover about each other's worlds. But for now, this moment, this exchange, was enough. The silence lingered between them for a moment longer, the weight of the conversation still hanging in the air. Tessa could sense Naira's mind working, piecing together all the information she had absorbed over the course of their discussions. The aliens' once rigid, logical approach to life had slowly given way to something more open, more curious. Tessa took a deep breath, pushing aside the thoughts that had started to cloud her own mind. She had been through a lot. Everyone had, in their own way. And it had been exhausting, even cathartic, to talk about it all. But now, she could see the faintest glimmer of understanding in Naira's eyes. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. So, Tessa began, breaking the quiet. What do you think? Do you see it now? Do you understand us a little better? Naira turned to her, her expression more thoughtful than before. I think I understand some of it. Perhaps not all, she said, her voice measured. But I see the value in your struggles now, in the way your emotions shape your lives. It is different from what I've known. Tessa nodded slowly, not sure how to respond, but grateful for the acknowledgement. It's not an easy way to live, but it's our way. And for all the pain, there's so much beauty in it. It's why we do everything we can to make connections with each other. Why we go through the highs and lows of love, loss, joy, and heartbreak. It makes us who we are. Naira stepped closer, her eyes searching Tessa's face, as though weighing her words more carefully now. I think, she said slowly, that I could learn to appreciate what you say. That life does not just exist for humans. It feels. It's not about efficiency or structure. It's about living fully even when that means embracing chaos. Tessa smiled, a small but genuine smile, grateful for how far Naira had come in understanding. Exactly. We may not always know what the next day holds, but we live in the moment. That's what makes it worth it. Naira seemed lost in thought again, her tendrils twitching slightly, and after a long pause, she spoke once more. On my world, life is built around logic and efficiency. The Xirians live by a code of order. We do not indulge in the mess of emotions as you do. But now, I see how much more complicated, yet how much more rich your lives are for it. Tessa gave a small laugh, the sound light and filled with warmth. We're a bit messy, yeah, but we're also capable of so much more than just surviving. We fight for each other. We grow. We change. And at the end of it, we get to say we really lived even if it wasn't perfect. Naira looked at Tessa for a long time, her expression unreadable but full of curiosity. I think you may be right. I think I can see the worth of this chaos you call life. But tell me, Tessa, do you ever wish things could be simpler, more predictable? Tessa thought about that for a moment. There were days when she longed for simplicity, when the complexity of human emotions and relationships felt overwhelming, when it seemed like all she needed was a break from it all. But in the end, she knew that those messy, unpredictable moments were the very core of what made her human. There are moments when I wish things could be easier, she admitted, her voice soft. But in those moments, I remember that simplicity wouldn't teach me anything. It's the challenges, the uncertainties, the difficult parts of life that help me grow. Without them, I wouldn't be who I am. Nara seemed to consider this for a long time, her eyes narrowing slightly in thought. Perhaps that is something I could learn to embrace, she said slowly. To live not just to exist, but to experience everything. To feel. To allow chaos to exist without fighting it. Tessa nodded. Exactly. It's not about eliminating the chaos. It's about living through it. And sometimes, it's the hardest thing you'll ever do. But when you come out the other side, you're stronger for it. Naira's tendrils fluttered in what might have been a gesture of acknowledgement. I think I understand better now. It's not about efficiency or control. It's about connection. It's about the highs and lows of feeling. About being a part of something bigger than oneself. Tessa smiled warmly, feeling the deep sense of satisfaction. Yeah, that's it. You've got it. You don't have to agree with everything we do. But I think you're starting to see why we do it. Naira tilted her head slightly, a rare, almost wistful expression appearing on her face. Perhaps I have more to learn from you than I initially realized. You make me see things differently. Tessa laughed softly, her heart light. I think we both have a lot to learn from each other. And that's the beauty of this, Naira. We're different, but we're both searching for the same thing. Meaning, connection, purpose. Naira nodded, a faint, almost imperceptible smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. Yes, I think I can live with that. As the conversation began to wind down, both Tessa and Naira stood in the stillness of the room, the weight of everything they had shared between them. It wasn't the end of their journey. There was still so much more to understand. But it felt like a beginning of mutual respect, of shared insights, and of the understanding that sometimes living in the mess of it all was the only way to truly experience life. And for the first time, Tessa felt that maybe, just maybe, they weren't so different after all.